a rebellion in heaven, a race of fallen angels. Ancient biblical scriptures calls them the sons of God, the watcher angels. They chose the beauty of earthly women over the beauty of heaven, an unholy union that brought about the birth of giants, a race of beings known as the Nephilim. We travel the world looking for archaeological, cultural, even spiritual traces of the existence of these angels and these giants left on earth during the days of their debaucherous existence. Beings whose allegorical and even physical handprints still remain in our midst. Those whose presence still remains behind the thinnest of veils that separate us from a neighboring dimension. Thousands of miles. One crew. One television series in the making. We're chasing angels and giants, the Watchers and the Nephilim. When you think of the biblical book of Genesis, Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, you probably and rightfully think of a time so ancient that it numbers into the thousands of years. The written texts about the Nephilim and the Watchers also date the narrative to a time not too far removed from the creation of mankind. Hi, I'm Tim Ross. Over the last 2 years, I, as well as my team, traveled across all 5 continents in search of physical, cultural, and even spiritual evidence that would point us to clues left behind by the Watchers, as well as their offspring, the giants, the Nephilim. On our previous episode, we took you to the Golan Heights, where the burial chamber at the center of the Gilgal Rephaim, as well as its geographical location, fits the profile of the possible burial site of the legendary giant king Og, said to have been killed by Moses and the Hebrews as they conquered ancient Israel. We also visited the traditional site of the battle between the iconic King David and the giant Goliath. As we return to the Western Hemisphere, we shift our focus to written historical accounts of giants in North America, perhaps as recently as some 650 years ago. We will also hear the thought-provoking eyewitness testimony of physical evidence of the actual bones of giants. We'll explore some seldom-seen pictures of relics that, it would seem, like countless public accounts of unearthed giants across the span of the continent, have been terminally and mysteriously suppressed. To the cynic who studies such matters, it would seem that an astounding amount of history has been altered or erased altogether in post-19th century literature and history. Much has actually been made about giants in North America. The legends of giants in the Americas are documented as far back as the travels of the man who inspired the name of a continent, Amerigo Vespucci, or in the original Italian, Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci had a series of writings that meticulously documented his explorations commissioned by the Crown of Spain, first and subsequently by the King of Portugal. The writings about his first exploration trip tell the account of the expedition's arrival in what would be the modern-day island paradise of Curacao, off the coast of Venezuela. Entries from his writings state, "We found a path in which we walked nearly 2 leagues inland and came to a village of about 12 houses in which there were only 7 women, who were so large that there was not one among them who was not a span and a half taller than myself. When they saw us, they were very much frightened, and the principal one among them, who was certainly a discreet woman, led us by signs into a house and had refreshments prepared for us. We saw such large women that we were about determining to carry off 2 young ones, about 15 years of age, and make a present of them to this king, as they were, without doubt, creatures whose stature was above that of common men. While we were debating this subject, 36 men entered the house where we were drinking. They were of such large stature that each one was taller when upon his knees than I when standing erect. In fact, they were the stature of giants in their size and in the proportion of their bodies, which corresponded well with their height. These writings are very much among some of the earliest written documentations of discoveries in the Mundus Novus, or New World. And while it's true that Vespuccio's writings have been subject to skepticism over his personal political and financial ambitions with the monarchy, as well as his desire to overshadow Christopher Columbus's fame, the fact remains that this claim fits remarkably well with the things that we find further west into the New World.
Ever struggling upward with the passage of millennia, man pressed eastward and northward as far as the great ice cap would permit. At last the world's climate grew warmer, the ice cap began to retreat, and finally a means of progress was opened from Asia across narrow Bering Strait. Some unknown Columbus discovered America perhaps 10,000 years ago.
One celebrated and widely studied piece of the legacy left by the early inhabitants of the American continent are the abundant and mysterious earth mounds built by Native Americans as part of their burial customs at large. In the state of Ohio alone, there are over 70 burial mounds, which have become modern-day tourist attractions whose legacies are thankfully protected by laws. Archived newspapers from the 1800s and 1900s tell us that a great deal of these mounds, not just in Ohio, but around the country, had strong connections to giants, and that oftentimes, when excavated, would yield skeletons whose size, by most accounts, seemed to hover around 9 to 10 feet tall. They are full of accounts of giants being unearthed from burial mounds from all over the United States. The mysteries, however, are not relegated simply to the bones unearthed. The impressive realization of these mounds is comparable in ingenuity and undertaking to the megaliths that are encountered all around the world.
28 of the mounds have been measured. They contain approximately 350,000 cubic yards of packed dirt. There is reason to believe that the dirt was carried in woven baskets, each holding about 35 pounds, more than 100 basket loads to the cubic yard. Using the estimate of 20 minutes as the time required to make a round trip with one basket load, one arrives at the astounding total of more than 1 million man-days of work. That is, one man toiling from sun up till sundown for more than 4,500 years.
Moving 60,000 tons of dirt by regular-sized hands takes quite the effort. One of the most famous and recognizable burial mounds in the state of Ohio is found in Adams County, the Great Serpent Mound. This famous mound is usually attributed to the Adena culture of ancient Ohio inhabitants, thought to be built in roughly 250 to 100 BC. This serpentine mound has been proven to be aligned to 2 solstices, as well as 2 equinox events every year. The shape of the serpent itself is an enigmatic vignette. The southern side of the serpent shows its tail to be coiled.
The Serpent Mound, the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is the largest snake effigy on the planet. And it shows the serpent with its mouth agape like this in the act of swallowing an egg. That's our discovery. No one's ever said that before. It's never been in writing, and I owe that to archaeologist, amateur archaeologist Mark Hirschman. And Mark had just been to the Serpent Mound, and he said, I think I know what it is, LA. It's the serpent with his mouth like this and the act of swallowing the egg. And that effigy is only seen when you're 200 feet above the ground. When you're down on the ground looking at it, you really don't know what you're looking at. Who is the prince of the power of the air? And why is it there? Why is it when I'm 200 feet above the Serpent Mound, it all, comes into perfect and makes perfect sense. There's the serpent with its mouth open, hailing back at Genesis 3:15, destroying the egg, the offspring of the woman, trying to make sure it doesn't happen so the one who will take his kingdom away from him will never manifest. So we're there, and the signage says, the Shawnee built this. Chief Joseph looked at that and laughed and sent me a quote from the longest and oldest Native American newspaper in America, from Chief Wallace, the chief of the Shawnee, who states, while we respected the Serpent Mound, the Shawnee did not build it.
This is Chief Joseph Amahura Riverwind, and his wife, Dr. Larilyn Riverwind. Chief Joseph and Dr. Larilyn both have extensive knowledge of ancient Native American culture in North America.
There's a deliberate changing of Native American oral tradition. Why? Maybe because it doesn't fit the academic narrative that's being taught in the schools and colleges right now, but we can't change our stories. A perfect example is the Shawnee people. They inhabited Ohio, the state of Ohio, and Ohio has, I think per capita, the largest amount of Indian mounds still based on everywhere else in the United States. Well, the Shawnee used to have control over that land. And a former chief of the Shawnee, Chief Wallace, who also happens to be a professor, she made a very clear statement that the Shawnee did not build those mounds. But yet you go to a state park there and it'll say, the Shawnee Indians built these mounds.
Cahokia is the largest mound in America, probably well over 450,000 tons of earth, easily. There's a 45-acre plaza that's there that's dead level within 2 inches. How is that done without modern day, machines and earth movers? So, of course, it's always with Native Americans and hoes, without any type of surveying tools. It's laughable because these people can't believe in the supernatural. And in order to look at this, there has to be a supernatural answer to the enigmas that we find all over the earth. How does a person lift a 100-ton stone in Sacsayhuamán Mound with multi-faceted sides and fit it next to another stone when there's no beast of burden? Llamas, that's not gonna work.
My people, the Cherokee, we also have the same story that our people did not build the mounds. The mounds were here and built by others. Many of the mounds have been used in ancient times for occult practices. Some of the structures that have been built over time relating to the mounds have intimate links to constellations and equinoxes and certain times of the year. So these are all part of the occult practices that occurred with these giants. The giants were renowned for being human sacrificers.
Sacrifice is always found at all of these sites. It's very, very complex. By the way, it's global. They set up shop in these places. What I mean by that, they come down, they build these edifices. It's Nephilim architecture, fallen angel technology. They are worshipped as gods. They are gateways, they are portals to allow the fallen ones to manifest.
What you see here is classic occult behavior.
We call this Nephilim architecture, fallen angel technology.
As we studied Serpent Mound, we reminisced about the unfortunate bad timing of the Serpentine Mound in Gilgad-Rephaim and the missed opportunity to get a closer look at it. The Serpentine Mound, first brought to public knowledge by Doug Van Dorn, sits a quarter of a mile from the Wheel of Giants and has been virtually unexplored. The imagery of a mound in the shape of a serpent was too coincidental. We needed a closer look at the Serpentine Mound of Bashan. Our cameraman, Matt Yancey, jumped at the chance to make the long trip to the desolate, remote, and somewhat hostile terrain of the land of Bashan in Golan Heights to get us a closer look.
Breaking news.
Bad timing again. During the early part of 2020, political tensions flared up between the United States and Iran. Every time something of this nature happens, Israel is potentially caught in the crossfire, this time with Matt there.
Potentially bringing this country to the brink of an all-out war.
I bet you weren't expecting this when you woke up today.
The whole Middle East seems to be getting a little bit messed up, so I woke up to a barrage of text messages from concerned friends and family.
Anytime that Iran gets riled up, well, their proxies, Hezbollah, they start shooting into the Golan.
I just look at them and see how they feel about things.
Right.
They're mildly concerned, but they seem to be in good spirits overall.
Yeah. The location, about the other elements to shoot and all that, and I'll have it to you. By the time you wake up, you should have it.
Okay.
All right?
Sounds good, man.
All right, pal. Be careful going up there.
Thankfully, the escalation of tension subsided, and Matt was, in fact, able to get us a much closer and better look at the mound. Doug Van Dorn was elated that we were able to get a much closer look. It's so reminiscent of the Serpent Mound in Ohio. And after the flyovers, coupled with the fact that no structures of this nature exist in Bashan, land of the serpent, we feel compelled to believe the theories that this is also, in fact, a burial ground. We are also compelled to theorize that given the historical timing, the biblical account, the excarnation cairn at the center of the Wheel of Giants and its size, and if the practice of burying giants in mounds is inherent, we could quite possibly be looking at the burial site of King Og, whom Moses killed in this very area of ancient Israel. And if Og was buried there, who knows what else or who else could have been buried there. Fritz Zimmerman is an author and researcher on the topic of the Nephilim. His research has made him a renowned voice in the topic of Indian mounds. Fritz was kind enough to join our crew in Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia to give us some amazing insight into this historic and storied mound.
This is the largest mound east of the Mississippi. This is a burial mound. The largest mound, of course, is Cahokia, but it's not a burial mound. But this is the largest in the Ohio Valley. When they excavated it back in the 1830s, they found two tombs. An upper tomb had a woman's burial. And then all the way at the bottom was a man's skeleton that was around 8 foot. The upper chamber was probably a good 15, 20 foot down.
Right.
And then they would have went ahead and capped that off.
And this isn't just hearsay, right? I mean, they bore into the mound. There was a museum. There were photographs taken at one point, or at least eyewitnesses.
Lithographs of the giant skeleton that for about 10 years you could go and pay your nickel and you could go see the giant skeleton. But they had some problems. They had some cave-ins and some things, and eventually they shut it down.
So the whole timeline of the mound is sort of in dispute. I mean, the local tradition or the consensus is that the Adena people built it, but I mean, that mound probably was here for a couple of thousand years, 500 BC, 300 BC, sometime before.
300 BC, 200 BC, yes. I mean, kind of in, right. the heart of the Adena era. And if you look at the mound behind us, you can see how steep it is.
Right. And it was taller before, right? Originally.
It was taller. I think there was maybe 10 foot or so that was taken off. At some point, there was a gazebo on the top of it.
Yeah, there were structures.
For some reason, but the declivity is super steep. So you're just not going to climb up, put your basket full of dirt on there, and then walk back down. You know, besides having to compact every one of these baskets full. And so there would have had to have been some sort of scaffolding or something around the mound for them to possibly build this.
So it sort of goes back to that idea. When you see massive structures like this, it makes sense to associate that with a people who could build things on a very large scale, like we see all through the world, really. But this would be the same idea, just with dirt.
With dirt, and then keeping in mind, and down this way, there was a perfect octagon with parallel ways that came towards the mound. Then there was some other structures to make a perfect isosceles triangle. Mm-hmm. So they were doing the same kind of geometric mathematics here that we would see at Newark or at Circleville or at some of the others, where it was evident that they knew pi, they knew square root, they knew
advanced
Pythagorean theorems. Yeah, they knew all of that.
We are talking about the offspring or descendants of the Nephilim, correct?
Right, and there was two catalysts for that. I mean, one, we have the Bronze Age, which the Amorites were fully engaged in, and so they needed copper. I think they originally came over here to mine the copper. I think some probably went into England and then eventually came over here. We know probably around BC, right around 0 BC, that the Celts were moving into England. So that was getting worse for these Amorites or Beaker people. So this was like their last stronghold. So I think there was probably multiple migrations. That's why we see hinges over in England. A hinge is a circular earthwork with an interior ditch and a gateway that's normally aligned to a solar event. So we have hinges in England, we have hinges over here. We have conical mounds over in England associated with these Beaker peoples, generally with like a circle or a moat that was around it. And we have that also here. And even at this site, there was a moat here at one time. What happened to it, we don't know. But there was, I don't know, 5-foot deep moat and 10, 15 feet wide that encircled this. So as far as the mounds and earthworks go, I mean, there's almost identical from England over to here.
And that can't be a coincidence. I mean, there had to be knowledge passed along or expanded as territories expanded or cultures moved.
Just to have this serendipitously giant people building hinges and mounds with circles around them, yeah.
But there was more than that here, right? I mean, there were up along the river of lookout towers, structures of some kind, and you contend that there were towers on either side of the river, which in essence would have sort of let people, travelers know they are entering an entire culture, an entire...
This is the gateway. Yeah, when you were coming down the Ohio River, you would have been able to see this mound, you would have seen the towers, and you knew that you were entering the land of the giants.
Now, you mentioned gateway in terms of the towers on the river, but these mounds, many say, were sort of gateways themselves, portals, if you will.
These people practice a cult of the dead, so they worship their ancestors. So you would have come here not just to look at the mound and know that there were a couple of people in there, but it was a place where you would worship your ancestors. And I don't have everything on this mound, but 90% of the mounds in Ohio, so you will have typical burials that are in like a tomb, but then a lot of people were cremated off-site, and then their ashes were put into the mound filled. So, I mean, even this mound here, I mean, could virtually have thousands of people that are in it. So you would go there to commune with these ancient spirits. So they're portals. They're a portal for the spirits to come in and out of. We know a little bit about that from the book of Enoch when it said of the Rephaim, which were the Nephilim dead, that said your spirits will be earthbound. And that's what this is all about. This is for earthbound spirits.
Hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles of lightly traveled roads cover this part of the country, slicing through scenic yet incredibly hostile desert terrain. It was here that the ancient Hopi and Anasazi Indians left their markings on rocks and canyon walls. And while the Hopi and Anasazi origins are dated to approximately 1,200 years ago, there are petroglyphs in these canyons that have been academically tested and are believed to be as much as 9,000 to 12,000 years old, clearly predating the Anasazi and Hopi Indian tribes.
I'm here at Four Corner Monument in the southwestern United States, the junction where Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico meet. Historically, this area is the epicenter for a vast quantity of Native American culture. But underneath the surface of the beautiful ruins and artifacts unearthed by the thousands every year lie deeper secrets that some say date long before Native American history, as far back as the Neolithic period. petroglyphs left on stone walls silently tell tales of beings much larger than average humans. Could these markings be evidence of the Nephilim in North America?
We travel 2 hours north of the Four Corners Monument through some of the most picturesque terrain treasures of the American Southwest. Hidden in the hundreds of miles of winding desert roads, nestled in canyons, cliffs, and oceans of succulents in a remote part of southern Utah, is Newspaper Rock State Historic Monument. This intriguing place that has become a curious and exciting destination for lovers of Native American ancient rock art. Officially, it is believed that the roughly 650 petroglyphs on this rock wall were etched by the Utes, Fremont, and Anasazi Native Americans. Our attention is immediately drawn to the multiple petroglyphs of 6-toed feet clearly and unmistakably etched into the rock wall. One could speculate that a single instance could have been a mistake by the etcher, or that perhaps it was influenced by one famous 6-toed tribesman. However, we count at least 7 in plain view, both right and left foot. Within close proximity, also we see these petroglyphs. Different theories exist on what these beings might have been. Some say that these are depictions of Indians in hunting camouflage made of buffalo hide. Others say that they are symbolism of social importance. It is obvious to the naked eye that whatever beings are represented here are much larger and presumably stronger and more intimidating than the average human being. And what of petroglyphs like these? Oftentimes, we see these groupings of large beings, normal-sized beings, and an animal. Could these clever rock artists have been giving us a size reference to their work, and again, about the 6-toed feet? Could it be that there was an abnormality that ran in the bloodline of some giants as a result of the mixture of angelic DNA with human DNA, which resulted in a common occurrence of polydactyly? Could it be that the beings represented on these walls are actually much older than 2,000 years?
And keeping in mind that these legends materialized globally at approximately the same time, it is more likely than not that the universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world, in which the astonishingly consistent tale is told of gods that descended from heaven or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. Note that when the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible, were written down around BC 1300, this would have been the exact same time when archaeologists believe the Anasazi across the world from those Bible lands were drawing giant 6-toed footprints on a slab wall in Utah and facing an alien enemy, as the name Anasazi implies. When the writings of the Torah are compared with other ancient texts, including Enoch, Jubilees, Baruch, Genesis, Apocryphon, Josephus, Jasher, Jubilees, many others, not counting the account of the American Indian tribes on this side of the world, it's very clear that this is more than a legend. It's history. It's a chronicle told through different people's methods and worldviews involving giants suddenly infesting the entire world and then being wiped out in a flood.
We drive approximately 300 miles south of Newspaper Rock into central Arizona. This is the historic town of Winslow, Arizona. The iconic and once magnificent transportation artery that connected the United States from east to west, Route 66, literally runs through the middle of the town, which, like an aged pageant queen, can't hide her age, yet remains alive and full of charm. Approximately 15 miles outside of Winslow is one of the best-kept secrets for lovers of archaeology as well as enthusiasts of ancient Native American history and folklore. This is Rock Art Ranch. This is a privately owned cattle ranch whose owners, the Baird family, run an educational and hospitality-driven experience for all who visit.
But did he actually find some items like this on the ranch as well?
No.
Just mostly the pottery?
Yeah, just the pottery and stuff.
These pots? These are
Yeah, he hit this one when he was building fence with a shovel there. He just hit it.
Bradley Baird has lived here since 1940 and is a bona fide, old-fashioned cowboy.
We came in 45, and we've been running cattle ever since. Yes.
How big is the ranch?
We have 5,000 acres.
The ranch's 5,000 acres of land boasts not only incredible Native American archaeological discoveries, but a priceless concentration of ancient petroglyphs, whose appeal has drawn everything from archaeologists to famed TV networks, and of course, thousands upon thousands of visitors throughout the decades. A short drive away from the main welcome center of this working ranch is the archaeological evidence of hundreds of years of predominantly Hopi presence that was either found scattered on the ground or recently unearthed by the Archaeological Society. Bradley Baird was adamant that the legacy of the Hopi Indians be as respected and as undisturbed as possible along the process of studying all that was found here. This display of a Hopi village, which has been partly reconstructed and partly unearthed here in the middle of the desert, is a ghostly and haunting reminder of a proud and resilient people who once thrived, hunted, and cultivated in massive numbers here, in this now desolate and drastically changed part of North America. The main attraction of Rock Art Ranch, however, is found on the walls of Chevelon Canyon. Thousands come to see the well-kept and impressive collection of ancient petroglyphs in the ranch. The canyon has been studied by the likes of National Geographic, as well as the North American Archaeological Society, and the thousands of petroglyphs in existence here have been meticulously cataloged. Animals, anthropomorphs, celestial figures, and abstract and unidentifiable drawings remain etched in the patina on the rock walls after centuries upon centuries of silent display.
They were here before the Hopis or the Navajo, right?
Well, when we got the site recorded on the National Register, they carbon date. They spent 5 years in this canyon, 3 weeks a year, getting it on the National Register. We want it on the National Register, so it would be good from now on. But they can carbon date the black in the walls, and down by the swimming hole down there, he claimed 7,500 to 6,000 BC. So you tack another 2,000 years, you're talking about 9,500 years ago. They claim them people were here.
And you say you can make guesses about what some of these symbols mean, but it's a mystery.
That's right.
And so we look with critical eyes through the thousands of years represented in these petroglyphs for the ones, or even the one, that somehow stands out differently from all the others. For the one who tells its story with a little dissonance from the rest.
Okay, so this is clearly a large figure, but it's also clearly a woman because she has such a thin waistline, and that's not typical of any of the other really large figures that we saw on any of the petroglyphs.
It's the middle of the day, and the excitement to explore the petroglyphs is infectious for myself as well as our producer. Unmistakably, in the middle of the brutal summer heat in the canyon, there is an edge of what seems to be a palpable presence that floods the otherwise deserted canyon. The familiar supernatural energy that we felt in Gil Al Rephaim once again descends on everything and completely envelops us even as we explore this remote and surreal canyon. We find our first item of interest. Above this rock, etched into 9,000 to 12,000-year-old patina. We suspect that among these ancient petroglyphs, there are in fact silent clues that would lead us to believe that among the things recorded here, perhaps the ancients told us stories about their encounters with beings that fit the description of the Nephilim, or even the Watchers. Perhaps even more puzzling and unexplainable encounters happened here in these very canyons.
But that's incredible. That's the one in the book, and what's interesting about that to me, and we've talked about this before, is how they didn't just make it big just for big's sake. They put regular-sized figures next to it to show how much bigger it is than the other stuff. You got the human and you got an elk. Elk is big out here. We see signs everywhere. But if an elk is that size compared to that, then it's clearly supposed to be a giant figure for some reason.
So it's giving it reference.
Right. They put that there to reference how big this figure is, whether in importance or physical stature or both. And you got more of that. Oh my gosh. Dude, check this out. I was busy looking at that over there, and I come over here, and there is clearly the alien, the typical alien drawing, which this isn't the only place this has ever been. But you got the huge eye sockets, you got the large elongated head.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even, like, I was paying attention to that, and I come over here, and there's an alien on the wall.
That's crazy.
That's, well, crazy, except we've seen it everywhere we've gone, right? I mean, is it crazy if it's everywhere?
Much has been said about the relevance to the topic of alien life and extraterrestrials in the conversation of the Watchers and the Nephilim. But that's a conversation that for now we will save for another time. We travel a bit deeper into the canyon, and what we see stands strikingly apart from the other petroglyphs that we've seen thus far.
Yeah, Rudy, come here, check this out. I was coming around the corner here and I see this, and you could say they were trying to draw a mountain, although none of them look like that around here. No trees like that, so my first thought was, man, that looks like a pyramid.
Above this rock, etched into 9,000 to 12,000-year-old patina, is what seems to be a drawing of a pyramid.
That looks like an exact perfect triangle.
It is worth noting that the closest known human-built pyramid to this place is over 1,300 miles in Los Cuachimontones in Mexico. And yet painted in this canyon wall is the perfect depiction of this ziggurat. How did they know the specifics of a pyramid? Was it oral tradition and accounts of the ancient days that perhaps heralded to the age of the Tower of Babel? Were the people of this place familiar with the worship practices of their contemporaries 1,300 miles away? Or was this possibly a rustic blueprint given by the Watchers themselves with the intention of having a location where mankind could bring their offerings and seek power or teachings? A little further down Chevelon Canyon is this vignette. Native American folklore is full of legends and oral traditions about both beings from heaven as well as giants. Is it possible that what we see here is a group of men being chased by a giant? Or perhaps, like many of the legends, were the men fighting back and chasing the giant, perhaps into a cave?
There's over 500 tribes just in the United States alone, so it's important to delineate that, especially since all the tribes don't have the same spiritual beliefs or traditions or even customs. And we don't speak for all the tribes, but only the knowledge that's been passed down to us from different elders and storytellers and medicine people from different tribes. One thing that is prevalent in all the stories is stories of giants. Of course, there's also spirits. And we know that there's good spirits, there's bad spirits. A lot of the stories, the giants are not good. They typically have 6 fingers, 6 toes on each foot, 6 fingers on each hand, double rows of teeth. There are stories of some that are red-haired, others where they're just giant, looking like what a Native American would look like, back in those ancient times. And we constantly warfared against these things. They were very, very sadistic. They were cannibals. They did horrible things to people, and in many cases, they also enslaved a lot of the tribes.
Fairly ubiquitously through the native tribes in the North America, the giants are not good. They're evil. They have a sadism about them. They were very much the enemy, and people were pursued and eaten. Our people were food in many cases. It's interesting that how the biblical narrative ties in with the occultism that is implied through scripture and through archaeological evidence of giant races.
Is it possible that the etcher of this petroglyph witnessed or was part of a moment in his life that was important enough to leave a record of it? Deeper research into the cultural and religious beliefs of the indigenous tribes of North America reveals that an astoundingly large number of them told stories of hostile giants and ogres in their distant past. The stories were told from generation to generation. Upon further investigation, we learned that the Hopi from this very area of Chevelon Canyon told the stories of an ogre named Chevelo Kachina, a fabled Hopi Indian giant. Chevelon Canyon's name is attributed to Will C. Barnes, writer of the early 20th century book Arizona Place Names. He attributed the Chevelon name to a story told to the settler Lorenzo Sitgreaves during an expedition in 1851. The story tells the account of a trapper from this area, simply known as Chevelon. He died immediately after accidentally eating a poisonous root on the banks of the river that runs through the canyon where they were camped that day. There is nothing else known about this mysterious Chevelon nor his origins, but in light of this curious name coincidence and similarity, could there be a direct connection between the given Chevelon name and the Chevelo Kachina ogre of Hopi legend? Perhaps pure coincidence, but if Chevelon was a trapper from the region, is it possible that his name was influenced by the local legends of giants in this area on the outskirts of Winslow, Arizona, an area that was once a hotbed of Hopi population? Could it also have been a hotbed of Nephilim activity, an area where these strange petroglyphs abound? While it's true the petroglyphs of supernaturally large six-toed beings and drawings of ziggurats left here by the Hopi and Anasazi on a canyon with a name reminiscent of a legendary giant and reminiscent of Goliath's family history of polydactyly might have a completely mundane explanation, is the inverse not also true? That perhaps this place once gave the ancient ones a reason for leaving such impressions as their legacies? Within minutes, we find ourselves in the long shadows of a fast-approaching sunset. We have only scratched the surface of all that awaits out there. If you were to see the bones of giants and were able to touch them, if you could find not one, not two, but an innumerable amount of newspaper articles detailing the unearthing of giant skeletons, would that make a believer out of you? The 19th and early 20th century American press gave extensive coverage to the existence of unearthed bones of giants. If someone dug up giant bones, chances are it made the papers. If you have the patience and the time, finding the articles for yourself in the tens of thousands of newspaper archives of the 19th and early 20th century should prove to be an exhilarating adventure in and of itself. Yes, of course, many of these newspapers were small-town, remote newspapers, but a surprising number of stories of these findings were made by the likes of newspapers such as the New York Times. But as we all know, absolutely nothing short of seeing something for yourself tells a story quite like an eyewitness account, especially one with pictures. The topic of giants in the Americas is hardly a new one. Much has been said about giants in the Americas. Pictures like these pop up with any internet search with the word giants. Unfortunately, practically all of those pictures have been debunked as hoaxes. However, the more credible stories sometimes seem to be the ones with few or little pictures, the ones with simple stories. traveled to the desert southwest region of the United States, to Reno, Nevada. Here, in the middle of some of the most desolate terrain in the world, there are no shortages of wide and open spaces. It is in these plains and in this ocean of sand, rocks, and the occasional salt flats that traveling north from Reno, you're bound to run into the town of Winnemucca. Winnemucca is an old miner town. The people here have a long, proud, and rich tradition of pulling the most precious of metals from these lands, gold. It is not uncommon for surveyors and miners to strike gold in these areas. We are hoping to do a little gold striking of our own. We have come to Winnemucca in search of eyewitness accounts of a controversial display that is said to once have been showcased in this small museum in the outskirts of Winnemucca, the Humboldt Museum. The display? Ancient Nephilim bones found in this region, ancient giant bones and giant skulls.
When we do, Paul says we will take hold of the life that is truly
Meet
life.
Martin and Renee Holstein. They have been coming to the Winnemucca area for decades to enjoy the unparalleled camping and fishing that is so common to this place, and have now officially lived here for 3.5 years, making Winnemucca their home after Martin retired from his job as a software programmer for Microsoft in Seattle, Washington.
I used to get a 2-week vacation every year when I was a computer programmer up in the Seattle area. So we'd travel the western United States a lot of the times, but this place was the nicest for us. So when I retired, we moved here.
In the early 2000s, Martin and Renee, both avid enthusiasts of the outdoors and faithful students of the biblical scriptures, had recently become familiar with the writings of Sarah Winnemucca, a 19th century Native American princess from the Paiute tribe native to Nevada, and the first known Native American woman to publish an autobiography. The book, Life Among the Paiutes. It was here in the late 2000s that word made its way to them about the Nephilim bones that were on display here at the Humboldt Museum. To their dismay, when they actually came to see them, the bones were no longer displayed as they had been for so long.
They weren't there, and we were a little upset. So we looked for the person working there, and we could only find this one woman, and she was about 84 years old at the time. And so we asked her what happened to all the bones of the giants, and she said one person had complained, and so the display had to come down. And it was no longer, the public was not allowed to see the bones anymore. I asked her, I says, how about if I give a small donation of some cash? Do you think we could see the bones then? And she goes, well, I think that might be able to be arranged. I put some money, everything I had, in this little plexiglass box, a donation box. When the coast was clear, she came to us and she said, follow me downstairs into the basement. There was a little office down there, and then she opened this cabinet up. There were the bones. And immediately I knew the jawbone didn't look like a normal human jawbone, it was bigger. There was a little plaster cast there too, to show how big a normal human jawbone was compared to this jawbone, which was quite a bit bigger.
In 1912, 2 archaeologists, Llewellyn L. Loud and Mark R. Harrington, were commissioned by the University of California Anthropology Department to explore the legendary cave that was already known for its huge deposit of guano, bat droppings that at the time were in high demand for the manufacture of gunpowder. Notes from the dig were compiled and published in what is now an extremely rare book, aptly called Lovelock Cave. It was authored by the 2 archaeologists in charge. The book details that the cave yielded over 10,000 archaeological specimens, among them duck decoys, baskets, rustic weapons, and some 60 mummified skeletons. Also among the finds, a sandal that measured over 15 inches in length. And while the notes of the dig in no way mention it, multiple oral accounts from the region say that the cave yielded skeletons that by some accounts were upwards of 7 to 10 feet tall and had red hair. Lastly, included in the book is a photograph of the curious remains of what some insist is a child, while others are convinced that this is an alien creature who presumably lived among them, or at least died among them. Again, a conversation for another time.
And there was some other bones too. There was like an arm of a human with the fingers on it, probably a Paiute Indian. Next to it, there was another bone. It looked like, I'm not an expert in anatomy, but it's obvious they set it up to compare it. There was another bone, this bone right here on the arm, next to that. And it was about 4 inches longer, it looked like to me. So I'm sitting here looking at the bones, touching them and doing all this kind of stuff. And then I asked her, what happened to the giant skulls? Because there was some Indian skulls there, but the giant skull that we read about was gone. She said that the University of California had taken nearly everything away. And I guess it's happened on more than one occasion too.
How the giant skeletons ended up on display is not really clear. Finding out is no easy task, especially when these days the museum vehemently disavows their very existence. However, what mankind can erase from history, sometimes it cannot erase from memory.
To me, it looked like, well, because it's laying on the floor.
Okay.
And it's in this glass enclosed. I guess it was supposed to be a coffin, I don't know. But from his, like, here down, I mean, he looked enormously long. So to me, he was 7 feet or more.
And the bones were all together and not pulled apart. And
they were interlocked. I mean, they were just, the bones went with the body. It wasn't fake.
M.K. Davis and Don Monroe are a renowned research duo in the United States. Don Monroe is the only known person to have ever photographed the giant skulls in the museum. His pictures have made their way all over the internet and major networks. They were contributors to this film and were kind enough to share with us some of their resources of their studies of Lovelock Cave. This is an interview that was filmed by them some 10 years ago with a local woman in Winnemucca, recounting seeing some of the giant skeletons on display there in the 1980s.
To me, the nose holes, the nostrils were larger, and the skeleton, the head of the skeleton was not humongously different, but it was longer than what a normal skeleton head that I've seen.
Yeah, and when you saw it, what was your reaction when you saw it for the first time?
I just thought, oh my God, because it was so big. I mean, I've never seen it. My brother's 6'6", 6'7". This thing was a lot bigger than my brother. And I mean, to me, it was just, I've never seen anything that huge, that long. So when he was standing up, you probably, you know, it would have...
He would have been like a giant, really.
Yeah, to me he would.
Yeah.
He was a giant laying down, so I can imagine if he was standing up.
These are the compelling pictures of the skulls that went missing by the time Martin and Renee made their way to the Humboldt Museum. Here's a picture of the cast of a normal human jaw put inside the giant skull for mandibular comparison. In this picture, this skull seems to show a double set of teeth, keeping consistent with many of the legends and stories from Native Americans. We wanted to see the famous yet extremely remote cave explored a century ago. The Alsteins were kind enough to make the long and potentially treacherous trip to take us to the very spot where Sarah Winnemucca's book gives the account of what brought about the demise of the giants, who, legend tells us, perished in this cave, the place that by all accounts is still covered in fossilized soot on the ceiling of the cave to this day. The long drive would take us through the actual town of Lovelock, from which the cave gets its name. We pass through Lovelock and continue 20 miles into the desert to the absolutely desolate area where the cave is found. The climb to the mouth of the cave is moderate and not too steep of a slope, although still not a climb to treat flippantly by any means. A bit hazardous. One slip to the side of the path and you are tumbling down some 200 feet to the bowl below, at least 40 minutes from the closest hospital and with absolutely no cell phone coverage. Beyond the rocky path and the huge boulders at the mouth of the cave, which some on internet message boards say is infested with rattlesnakes, we will see if there is a convincing amount of soot to corroborate, at the very least, a sizable fire in this cave. The deadly ambush of the giants here, we are told, came as a result of years of raids and slaughter of the Paiutes, the Shoshone, and the Bannock, at the hands of the giants. The three tribes were proud people, but they put their tribal differences aside to form an army of three nations, and together they rid themselves of the problem of the giants by chasing them into the cave and burning them alive.
The Native Americans didn't have anything nice to say about the red-haired giants. They said they were sexually perverted, they would rape you, bite your head off, drink all the blood out of your body, and then throw your corpse on the ground. That's from the Nez Perce tribe.
That tribe would even eat their own dead. Yes, they would even come and dig up our dead after they were buried, and would carry them off and eat them. Now and then, they would come and make war on my people. They would fight, and as fast as they killed one another on either side, the women would carry off those who were killed. My people say they were very brave. When they were fighting, they would jump up in the air after the arrows that went over their heads and shoot the same arrows back again.
It was just like in the book of Enoch. They drank blood. They ate human flesh. They were into the occult. They were not nice people.
Consistent with Sarah Winnemucca's book, the ceiling of the cave is, in fact, absolutely covered in what looks like fossilized or crystallized soot. From what we are told, the fire was so intense that it melted the limestone and coated the soot, forever trapping it and preserving it, much like a glass cover.
The Paiute warriors drove the giants into the cave and put brush up against it. They were calling them out to fight, trying to egg them on to come out and fight because they were actually prepared. They were tired of them taking the children and killing people. So the warriors, the giants, were in the cave and didn't want to come out. So the warriors, the Paiute warriors, shoved brush and all kind of fire-starting materials up at the mouth of the cave and lit it on fire. And some of the giants did come out of the cave, whereupon the Paiutes shot them with arrows and killed them. But some of them suffocated, asphyxiated in the cave from the fire.
Some years ago, Don Monroe and M.K. Davis stumbled upon something incredible inside this cave. They found a giant, soot-covered handprint on the rock wall of the cave. He photographed it. A few years later, upon returning, he found that the stone had been willfully destroyed. The account of cannibalism by giants is consistent with some of the accounts of the Anasazi tribe who lived in cliff dwellings in Mesa Verde, Colorado. There are those who believe that their mysterious disappearances from these cliff dwellings came as the result of cannibal giants who devoured all of them and left no trace of them at all. The quaint museum in Winnemucca is on record saying that any skulls that were ever on display were regular-sized skulls of Native Americans that by law have been returned to the reservation for proper burial. However, what circumstance sometimes seems to conceal will sometimes surface in the form of simple public records and history. February 22, 1952. The Nevada State Journal newspaper advertises an event at the Nevada Art Gallery in Reno, in which an enigmatic Mrs. J.O. Beatty is said to have been a featured speaker, lecturing on what the newspaper describes as a race of giant Indians dating back to the Stone Age, or about 2000 BC. The article describes Mrs. Beatty as not only being a graduate of the University of Nevada, but also as the executive secretary of the Nevada Historical Society. The article goes on to say that Beatty is especially well qualified to tell of all this, as she has investigated and studied Nevada from early childhood, and her daily contact with all the items in the Historical Society's museum in the state building make her talks very interesting. So how did the bones end up at the Humboldt Museum? The truth is, we might never know. At the time of this taping, the museum was closed due to COVID-19 restrictions, and our calls about an interview were never returned. There were other witnesses, but in this small town, they would not speak on camera. One thing is clear though, if the locals are to be believed, there were in fact giant bones and skulls here in Winnemucca. This we know, because Martin and Renee Alstein saw them up close. In the past, their account has sometimes been met with an offensive disbelief and even mockery.
You know, when people ridicule us, it really hurts and don't take us seriously.
I sat there for probably 10, 15 minutes, and I was holding the bones, looking at them, turning them around, you know, comparing the little plaster cast to the jawbone to show how big it was, and looking back at her and smiling and stuff. Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, I know what I saw. I'm not going to take it back. And anybody that lives in this town between 60 and 90 years old has probably seen them. There's probably hundreds of people in this town and this area who have actually seen the bones.
Nobody's going to tell us anything different. I mean, we know what we saw, and that's that.
The question comes up often. Why would anyone set out to suppress any evidence of the Watchers and the Nephilim? Well, some experts seem to think that evidence of the existence of a race of giants across the planet would throw the scientific and academic world into a tailspin. To challenge the traditional Darwinian approach to mankind's origins is not looked upon favorably by academia. As our team continues to film for our series, and as we continue our journey, the tone of our expedition will take a turn towards the supernatural and take us awfully close to the neighboring dimension of the spiritual realm. Wonders most definitely await. Until the next time.